The rain poured down in relentless sheets, drenching the streets of the city in a silver blur. Car horns echoed in the distance, headlights cut through the storm, and people hurried by with umbrellas held tightly over their heads. But amidst the chaos, one man stopped dead in his tracks. David Marshall, a millionaire known across the city for his towering buildings, sleek cars, and flawless suits, stood frozen outside his black luxury sedan. His driver waited with the door open, but David didn't move. His sharp eyes had caught something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. There, near the steps of his company headquarters, an elderly couple lay collapsed in the pouring rain, their frail bodies trembling as water streamed down their faces. Their clothes were soaked through, clinging to their thin frames. The woman clutched her husband's hand desperately, while the man gasped weakly, struggling even to breathe. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, the storm fading into silence as David's heart pounded. He was a man who thought he had seen everything. He had built empires, survived cutthroat deals, and faced betrayals that could destroy lesser men. Yet here, watching two fragile souls fight to stay conscious in the storm, he felt utterly powerless. Something inside him shifted. The image of his late parents, who had struggled all their lives to give him an education, flashed before his eyes. They too had known the sting of poverty, the loneliness of not being helped when they needed it most. Without thinking, David sprinted forward, his expensive shoes splashing in puddles as he dropped to his knees beside the couple. "Sir, Mom, can you hear me?" he shouted over the rain, gently shaking the man's shoulder. The woman looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Please help. He hasn't eaten in days," she whispered, her voice so faint it nearly vanished into the storm. David shouted for his driver. "Call an ambulance, now." He stripped off his designer coat and wrapped it around the woman, ignoring how the cold water soaked through his shirt. The man's face was pale, his breath shallow, and David felt panic rising in his chest. "Stay with me," he urged, holding the man's hand. It was the first time in years David had knelt in the dirt for someone else, and as the sirens finally wailed in the distance, he realized his life was about to change forever. The hospital waiting room was dimly lit and heavy with the smell of disinfectant. David paced back and forth, his perfectly groomed hair still dripping from the rain. The couple had been rushed into emergency care. Doctors worked frantically while nurses whispered about how the pair had been found collapsed. David caught fragments of their story. Homeless, struggling, abandoned by family, and too proud to beg. Something inside him broke. For years he had built walls around himself, convinced that success meant distance, that money was the only shield from pain. But tonight, those walls were crumbling. When the doctor finally emerged, David braced himself. "They're stable," the doctor said gently. The man was malnourished and severely dehydrated. His wife is exhausted and weak, but with care. "They'll recover." Relief swept through David like a wave. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. For a long time he just sat there shaken. But as he lifted his head and looked at the couple through the glass window, now resting in their hospital beds, fingers still entwined, he made a decision that would change not only their lives, but his own. The next morning, David returned. The elderly woman, whose name was Margaret, smiled faintly when she saw him. Her husband, Thomas, weak but awake, tried to sit up. David gently stopped him. "Don't move," he said. "You're safe now, both of you." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Why would a man like you stop for us? Everyone else walked by." David hesitated, his throat tightening. "Because once I was you. My parents worked themselves to the bone, and no one helped them when they fell. I swore I'd never forget where I came from, but maybe I did. Until last night." Over the next weeks, David personally oversaw their care. He paid their hospital bills without hesitation, arranged for them to have warm clothes, and even set up a modest apartment for them once they were strong enough to leave. But the story didn't end there. As he grew closer to Thomas and Margaret, he uncovered the challenges they had faced: a son who abandoned them after taking their savings, a pension that never arrived due to bureaucratic failures, and nights spent sleeping under bridges while people walked past without a glance. Their story was heartbreaking, yet their resilience was inspiring. David felt a fire light within him. If this could happen to one couple, how many more were suffering unseen? He began visiting shelters in secret, meeting people who had once been teachers, war veterans, single parents, ordinary people who had been swallowed by misfortune. He listened to their stories, and with every word, he felt his heart grow heavier and stronger. Finally, he acted. David announced a new foundation, not in his name, but in honor of his parents, the Marshall Haven. It would provide food, shelter, and medical care for the elderly and vulnerable. He donated millions, but more importantly, he gave his time. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a millionaire on a pedestal. He was a man kneeling beside those in need. Of course, challenges came. Some of his business partners sneered, claiming charity was weakness. Shareholders worried about his reputation being tied to street people. But David no longer cared. He had found something worth more than profit: human dignity. And when Margaret and Thomas stood beside him at the opening of the first Haven shelter, tears streaming down their wrinkled cheeks as they called him family, David knew he had chosen the right path. Months later, David walked through the rain again, but this time he didn't feel alone. The storm didn't frighten him. Instead, he remembered that night when he stopped, when he chose compassion over indifference, and he knew he would never turn away again. So, if you are watching this story, I want you to ask yourself, how many times have you walked past someone in need? How many times have you looked away, thinking it wasn't your problem? Remember, kindness doesn't always require millions. Sometimes it's as simple as stopping, listening, and reaching out a hand. Friends, if this story touched your heart, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your experiences, your reflections, and let's build a community where compassion is stronger than indifference. And if you believe in kindness, in humanity, and in changing the world one act at a time, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Be Kind Always, where stories like this remind us that love and empathy are the true wealth of life. Because sometimes, stopping for just one person can change everything.